I knew. There was more to you than meets the eye.
Hito Batosai, a name which struck fear in the hearts of the shogunate during the waning days of the Edo period. A man who lived in the shadows, cutting down threats to the imperialist regime, earning himself the title of the slashing sword samurai man killer. There are few anime or manga that encapsulate the heart and soul of an era like Rurouni Kenshin. The story is a goldmine of history and culture. Last time we visited the series, we talked about the Meiji Restoration and the Bakumatsu War, but this time I wanted to dive into something a little different. What did it mean to be a samurai, and what did being a samurai mean to Kenshin? Picking up a sword and swearing an oath to kill in the name isn't something to be taken lightly. Throughout his story, we see the effects of this decision take its toll on Kenshin repeatedly, but he's not the only one whose samurai past bleeds into a future ruled by peace and progress. One does not live without a sword if said weapon breaks, and when Kenshin Himura walked away from his days of assassination, his abandoned position needed to be filled. But not all swords are created equal, and Makoto Shishio, while equally deadly, was a double-edged blade. Two samurai who held the same position for the same master left on extremely different terms. Having lost everything, Kenshin simply walked away. Shishio, on the other hand, reveled in his position, striking fear not only in those who met his blade, but his masters who attempted to hold his leash. During the final campaign of the Boshin War, the last civil war before the imperial seat took over Japan, Shishio was shot in the head by his own side, burned alive, and left for dead. Two legendary assassins, one scarred on the outside, the other on the inside. Two conflicting ideals, two contrasting personalities. They were destined to clash in one of the greatest climaxes in shonen history. So let's get into it. Guys, as of this video's launch, pre-orders for Figurama Collector's jaw-dropping Rurouni Kenshin 25th Anniversary Elite Exclusive Statue are live. This is not only an astounding piece, but the first Kenshin statue ever created. Our friends over at Figurama Collectors were kind enough to sponsor this video, as well as send me their Thor Ragnarok statue based off a limited Marvel comic run, and holy crap, look at this thing. Now, I'm a big collector and constantly have my eyes out for new things to put in my house and make my girlfriend mad, but Figurama Collector's website had me feeling like a kid in a candy shop. Their statues are the realest of deals and something I can firmly stand behind as pieces of art. This 2-foot by 2-foot Kenshin vs. Shishio piece is their first foray into the samurai genre and the most culturally and historically researched work they've made to date. I personally want you to have a chance to get this before pre-orders run out, so follow the link in the description and use our personal code Bonsai Samurai for $35 off, and do it quick. Pre-orders are known to sell out within 24 hours. And thank you very much, Figurama Collectors, for sponsoring this video. Now let's talk about Kenshin. By the time we meet Kenshin, the true samurai is a thing of the past. Class was dissolved by the Meiji government, and what was left were men that were shells of their former selves. Ironically, until the time Kenshin and Shishio fought for the imperialists during the Bakumatsu and Boshin wars, samurai hadn't really been needed for their main purpose, warfare, for over 200 years. The Edo period, which preceded the Meiji Restoration, was a time of unprecedented peace brought on by our old buddies, the Tokugawa shogunate. However, the story of the samurai, which led to the decisive battle between Shishio and Kenshin, started long before the Tokugawa came to power in the early 1600s. Beginning back in 1185 AD, a ruling class of warriors came to power during the feudal era of Japan, who would become known as the samurai. These elite soldiers would protect their lords and Japan as a whole with their blades and their lives. The warriors would continue to maintain the country alongside the shogun and the daimyo for 676 years. So not only were Kenshin and Shishio samurai, but they were the last remaining members of a pedigree that ran for over half a millennium. In the 1896 book Feudal and Modern Japan, Arthur May Knapp wrote, "The samurai of 30 years ago had behind him 1,000 years of training in the law of honor, obedience, duty, and self-sacrifice. It was not needed to create or establish them. As a child, he had but to be instructed, as indeed he was from his earliest years, in the etiquette of self-immolation." Despite their deep and historical heritage, when Shishio and Kenshin finally cross swords, there is a missing factor that changes everything. A samurai is not a samurai without a lord to serve. While fierce warriors, they were also public figures, basically nobles. In feudal Japan, things were run by class, and the samurai were far up on the food chain. They had money, status, and a strict code of honor to adhere to. Their swords weren't just weapons, but status symbols that protected them from their enemies, shielded their lord, and garnered respect from those beneath them on the social chain. They were police, soldiers, bodyguards, and the fingers on the hand of their ruler. Ironically, like their former status of imperialist Hitokiri, Shishio and Kenshin swords are also of the same origin, both made by the master swordsmith Arai Shaku. Shishio's Mugenjin is the most deadly of swords, self-sharpening, bathed in flammable body fat from his countless victims. Vicious and serrated, it was a sword of death. Kenshin's Sakabato Shinuchi is a plain reverse sword of incredible strength, but almost impossible to kill with. Two different swords made by the same hands for two different people with two different purposes to serve. However, Kenshin left his lord behind when he was done killing. He no longer belonged to the Meiji regime nor to anyone else. It's a sense of purpose that was left behind along with his honor, for there was nothing more shameful than abandoning your lord. Shishio, on the other hand, was betrayed by his lord and given a shameful, dishonorable, and cowardly death, a wound that did nothing to dissipate his power-hungry and sociopathic tendencies. And while these two men hate each other, there is a certain sympathy they must feel for one another, having lost their purpose and being tasked with creating a new one for themselves. It's much easier to be told what to do than to think for yourself. Part of being a samurai was spiritual in nature. It takes a lot to dedicate your entire being to a cause. Dedication to the point of willingly committing seppuku or personal disembowelment in the name of your own honor or the honor of your master. This was something that had to be done, guilty or not, of any crime if it was commanded of you, and something done willingly if a samurai felt his honor was in question. To live and to die by the sword takes an almost inhuman level of devotion, and this devotion was eventually summed up in the term Bushido, a word meant to describe the many and varied facets of the samurai code and way of life, the way of the warriors. While Kenshin and Shishio had no masters to pledge their swords to, they nonetheless had the same kind of single-mindedness attributed to samurai nature, though for extremely different ends. Kenshin, after years of bloodshed watching the life burn out of people's eyes as he removed his blade from their bodies, only wished for peace and to atone for what he saw as his wrongdoing. Hence the symbolism of his Sakabato, or reverse blade sword, a blade turned inward at itself, a constant threat against the Hitokiri that lived in his soul. On the flip side, Shishio saw his killing as less of an obligation and more of a divine right. As someone with power, he could use that power as he pleased to control those weaker than him or eliminate them entirely. As such, he used the philosophy of social Darwinism and the chaos of anarchism as an excuse to wage war on the new Meiji government, seeing it as weak and inferior to himself, a structure not fit for the proud nation of Japan, which for so long maintained its independence with ingenuity and pure willpower. While Kenshin saw this peaceful government as a way forward, a way for the disenfranchised to rise up and have an opportunity for a better life, Shishio saw it as an insult to those who had the strength to do it on their own, a disgrace to Japan. While in extreme contrast, both views are absolutely sincere. Bushido, while esoteric, is wholly defined by the action of sincerity. There are many facets to the code, but sincerity is by far of the utmost importance. Now, the structure of Eastern thought is vastly different from that of the West, and by that I mean the way these two cultures view every little thing in the world has differing significances. Bushido is governed by four ruling philosophies: Shintoism, Zen Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism. Ironically, the core fundamentals of Zen, Taoism, and Shinto are in stark contrast with those of Confucianism, namely that Confucianism deals with extremely material facets of heavenly being, whereas the rest require far more spiritual practice. However, all of them have an explicit emphasis on sincerity, honesty, and right action. Right action is the most difficult to explain, but simply put, it's the act of acting without premeditation. It's doing the right thing without considering it first, being true to yourself and the basest of nature while remaining sincere, honest, and morally virtuous is a sign of an enlightened person. Sincerity is the difference between doing something and being something. These practices, coupled with the rigid social honor and respect of Confucianism, brought wisdom and sincerity to men who lived an otherwise violent life. What we see in Kenshin and Shishio is this practice in two lights. Kenshin is a reformed assassin, a pacifist who wishes to never commit violence again. Yet, when faced with being the only man in Japan who stands a chance of stopping Shishio, he confronts him head on. It could be said that his new master is peace, While viewed as a ronin, a disgraceful ex-samurai who wanders aimlessly, in truth, Kenshin has maintained his Bushido practice for a higher purpose. He pledges himself to an idea or concept in line with those teachings. Also, the same could be said for Shishio, however, his new master is only himself and his desires. In this way, the fight between Shishio and Kenshin can be seen as an allegory to Christ and Satan. Both men have the same father figure, in this case that being the imperial military, the god figure in this example. One of these men left to protect the rules and wishes of that reigning power, while the other wishes to violently upheave it. And as we see, like Lucifer, Shishio is cast into hell. To requote Nap on the samurai, as a child he had but to be instructed, as indeed he was from his earliest years, in the etiquette of self-immolation. It's much easier to fight for a goal than it is to maintain the status quo. Ambition and desire fuels passion and power, and in the conflict between Kenshin and Shishio, Shishio is clearly superior, driven by aggression. However, his past punishment of being lit on fire left him with a severe handicap. His pores have been fused together, leaving him without the ability to sweat, and with not being able to regulate his body temperature, excessive action could lead to severe consequences. Normally, this would be something like a stroke or brain damage, average consequences of having essentially a fever. However, with his hatred and ambitions literally burning, he meets Kenshin's Hiten Mitsurugi Ryu head-on again and again, only to inevitably, spontaneously combust. They say that passions, ambitions, or hatred can consume you. Kenshin was a samurai to the end. His defensive blade was all he needed to defeat the monstrous Shishio. However, the same thing could be argued for Shishio as well. While his master was his own greed, he gave it the dedication and sincerity befitting the way of the warrior. He fought his predecessor and philosophical enemy head-on as a warrior with duty and self-sacrifice. But in the end, he failed to uphold the wisdom and serenity required of a true samurai following the path of Bushido, the way of the warrior, and thusly practiced the etiquette of self-immolation. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. I'm glad that you came for our second Kenshin video. If you haven't seen our first one, you should definitely check that out. It was a lot of fun and it did really well. And next week begins the first year anniversary of the channel. So we have two special videos that we're going to be working on over the next couple weeks to celebrate that with you guys. It's going to be a good time. Also, speaking of covering anime a second time, let us know what episodes from last year were your favorites and what you would like to see us dive into again. And before I sign off, I got to send out two very special thank yous. The first is to Figurama collectors for sending me this Thor statue and for sponsoring the video. Thank you, you guys are awesome. And the second shout out is to our lucky patron of the week, Lady Lavender. Thank you so much for helping us and supporting the channel. Thank you all for helping this channel grow to what it is today. And with all of that said, make sure that you follow us on Twitter and Instagram. That is at bonsai_pop on both of those platforms for extra content. And I suppose that's it. Watch our other videos. My name is Mike. This is Bonsai Pop. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.